Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the AAS YouTube channel. And this one is the AAS Journal Scientific Editors. And I am very happy to have Brad Gibson with us today. Hey, Brad.
Hey, Frank. Thanks very much for having me.
Oh, it's wonderful to have you and see you. I haven't seen you in person in about a year and a half.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
It's been a while. I miss seeing you guys in real life. You're good in 2 dimensions, but you're even better in 3.
Absolutely. So what's your geolocation these days?
I'm sitting in the city of Hull, which is on the east side of the UK, a fairly isolated part of the UK. Lovely little city, marine history, beautiful beaches, beautiful waterfront. Not many people know about it. It's got a bad rep because of its, I guess, its working class reputation, but it is a very friendly, warm place to live. I'm really, really happy with the decision to move here a few years ago.
That's great. That's fantastic. Super. So I'm in Phoenix. It is going to be on the order of about 80-ish today, 80 F. So
that's a little bit different. It's about 8.
40. Yeah. Okay. So, 35-ish or something C or something today.
Yeah, it's about 30 more than it is here today. It's a tad chilly here.
Yeah, but other than that, I'm doing okay. My family's doing all right. COVID all sort of raging in the U.S., but we're hanging out. How's the pandemic doing in the UK?
It's not been good, let's just say. There's a lot of parallels with the U.S. and certainly on a per capita basis, we're not far off from a bit behind the U.S., but still nothing to be proud of. The region we were in, the first wave more or less missed us. We were pretty good. Second wave has hit the region pretty hard. It's now first or second on the league table of the worst places within the UK. Still not maybe at the same level as a lot of the hard hit places in the US. And, campus, very quiet. Where we live outside of Hull, very quiet. So in that sense, we've been more or less untouched in a personal level.
Are courses going in person?
We've had right up till, well, today was our final day of some component of face-to-face. All the lectures are effectively online, but we had small group tutorials. We're still being done face-to-face, taking 6 people in a 150 seat lecture theater and spreading them around, that sort of thing. So the small group teaching, small group tutorials, but that probably amounted to maybe 20%, 30% of the material was done face-to-face. And students did have the option of opting out and doing it remotely if they wanted to. But yeah, today is the final day. The rest of the semester is all, including tutorials, all face-to-face from here on out.
Well, I kind of get the feeling that perhaps mistaken because of COVID, that Brexit has also slowed down. Seems like
I mean, it's happening. If you go to the gov.uk webpage now, I think they put a timer on today. So now it says 35 days. There's like a countdown to Brexit. So it's true. It doesn't make, the headlines clearly over the last month. It's still ticking along there behind the scenes. So you've got, COVID is clearly dominating for good reason, but we do have this hanging over our head and what the impact is going to be for our little area of the higher education sector. So yeah, we've got that to look forward to as well when we get back from Christmas. So we've done a couple of recent staff hires in physics and maths, but we fast-tracked their start dates to be before the end of the calendar year to try to minimize the pain and paperwork that will happen come January 1st, at least for EU citizens. So yeah, we'll see how we go.
Well, cross fingers on that one.
Yeah.
So Brad, what do you like to do for research?
What do I like to do? Well, it's sort of evolved with time. I was thinking back on my career. It's been, I guess, 25 years since I completed my PhD, and for looking back on it a little bit now, I started off in instrumentation, oddly, and that was
I know that.
University of British Columbia, and it was designing and building the first liquid mirror telescope observatory.
Cool.
So that was my master's project when I got there. So I spent 2 years on designing, constructing right from scratch, basically this 3 meter class LMT. What I discovered was, after several trips to hospital, because of things that I had done during the construction phase, I realized that probably instrumentation was not for me. I shouldn't be trusted with a table saw. So that was literally day one of my postgraduate degree. I was handed some pieces of 2x4 and a table saw, and my supervisor said, cut these things. And it's the first time I'd ever seen a table saw other than on TV. And so I'm happily cutting wood. I reached in to grab the wood, and those table saws move really fast. And my finger just went bing, bounced off of that, and it turned my finger inside out. And so within an hour of starting my postgraduate degree, my supervisor was rushing me off to hospital so they could put it all back together again. That should have been a clear signature that he had taken the wrong student onto the wrong project. Unfortunately, it wasn't my last time to hospital. But after the second time to hospital, after splitting my head open, I decided maybe I should move into something a little safer, and decided to sit back in front of a computer and do a little bit of a theory and computational work. So I got into the field of sort of galactic chemical evolution. I thought I would start writing a software package that would be used to help in the reduction and analysis of the data that was going to be coming in from the liquid mirror telescope. So that's sort of how I got into the sort of the theory side of things. And I've not really moved too far from that over the last 25 years, other than when I went off to do my postdocs, I decided I wanted to experience what life was like as a observational astronomer. So I had the opportunity when I was in Australia because I was funded by a Canadian government grant, that I could sort of pick and choose what I wanted to work on. So I threw myself into observational astronomy, did a lot of work with the HST Key project on the extragalactic distance scale. For about 5 years, I worked on that more or less from beginning to end. Did a lot of work with H1, high pass, H1 Parks, all sky survey, and I sort of led all the work on H1 and the halo and high velocity clouds. Cool. And I moved off to Colorado for postdoc number 2 and did a lot of FUSE, Hubble Space Telescope work, UV work, which was great. But now over the last sort of 10, 15 years, I've sort of moved back to sort of the theory and computation sides. It's been mostly since then kind of marrying up the analytical style of chemical evolution that I had been working on back in the day with the sort of cosmological hydrodynamical codes, Ramses and gasoline and GCD plus, all these other codes that are out there, sort of bringing my skills to bear onto skills that others had in the hydrodynamical side of things. So that sort of is a meandering path from where I started to where I am now.
No, that's great. That's great. So let me invite you then to do a little future look on some of the things you see on the horizon in your research, chemical evolution.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to say one thing that I probably didn't say is, how I got into the field. And not in so how I got into the field, but why I'm still in the field. And so while I was moving into theory and computation and chemical evolution, I look back on it now, and there's, I struggled through my PhD, probably as everyone struggles at some point in time, and had lots of crises of confidence. I was working, because I'd moved from instrumentation into theory, I was working in a field where there really wasn't anyone in Vancouver at the time who was working in those areas. So I was more or less isolated and working on my own. Mm-hmm. And for me, there were 2 sort of pivotal people who have allowed me to continue doing what I'm doing now. And if I hadn't had them, I would have finished up my PhD, but I probably would have moved off into industry or data science or the equivalent, some sort of image processing sort of thing. I'm not sure. But my unofficial supervisor, if you like, my mentor, was Francesca Mattiucci, who I'd made contact with. And she was incredibly generous with her time, even though I wasn't technically her student. So that really made a huge difference in me being able to sort of continue on in the field and build collaborative links, which is great. And the other one who really made a big difference maybe a surprise to you, but it was yourself.
Huh?
And you know,
That is a surprise.
you know, this was right around the time, you know, if I only had my art, you know, back then I was using Elm and Pine for my emails, and you know, it was the time of your classic paper and chemical evolution, and you know, Timmy's Woosley Weaver, which was a fundamentally important paper in the field. And I had made contact with you because, you know, one of the things I was doing was trying to verify my own code. Was I was just testing against others, not to be, you know, prove one was right or wrong, but it was kind of an internal check that I was at least could recover what other people had done. And you know, you were incredibly, you know, generous. You gave me your source code. You gave me setup files so I could actually test things. And you know, I probably have never had a chance to sort of sit down and thank you properly. But you know, if I didn't have that, you know, both you and Francesca to help validate what I was doing and make me feel that I was actually adding something of value. Again, I would have written up and moved on to something else, but those were two really important people, yourself included there, that have played a part in me still being here 25 years later doing the stuff that I love. So just wanted, you know, it's a great opportunity for me to thank you for the role that you played that you may not have realized that you had played in getting me to where I am now.
Okay, so number one,
not trying to stroke your ego.
I'll make a comment on that. So number one, yay, Francesca. Thank you very much. I definitely interacted with Francesca in my days doing that. Number two, you're embarrassing me. You've been doing it 25 years. I'm not even going to talk about where I might be. So, but you're welcome. I remember your emails. I remember our exchanges. It hasn't been the first time in my life or the last time that I've shared source code. I think that's a really important thing to do.
I think it is a really important thing to do, and it wasn't commonplace back, you know, 25 years ago. And then, you know, things have changed with, you know, open source and GitHub and that willingness to share things that that was not the case back then. And, you know, my PhD, if I was starting it now, would be very different than what it was back then. So you guys were sort of pioneers in the sense of actually being willing to share your code. So I appreciate it.
Predate GitHub, predate SourceForge, predate.
That's right.
I'll just leave it as predate.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's wild. Okay. You, I do believe, have a pretty interesting history with the AAS journals. So let me start off. What was your first AAS journal paper? When was that article, I should say?
So that is a really good. I had to go back and look that one up. So it in fact was, you know, I looked up very quickly today because I wanted to be sure I had the numbers right. So I've got about 330 refereed papers, but 130 of them have appeared in AAS journals. So that, you know, my involvement with the AAS in that sense, you know, has been a big part of my career, and just from a purely statistical sense, obviously they've played a big part. But I look back, my first ever science paper was 1992, and it was on wavefront aberrations associated with rotating liquid mirrors. So it was associated with the Manuscript project. So I went back and looked at it, and first off, I'm stunned that I actually wrote this thing because it is filled with a bewildering array of high-level mathematics. And I look at it now and think, my God, I must have known a lot of maths back then in 1992. I can read the words and it's my voice. I know it's me who wrote it, but I look at it and I'm sort of astounded. And in some sense, you know, I thought about it again today. It is the most intensive mathematical paper. In some ways, it's kind of the one I'm most proud of in some sense.
There you go.
And I really can't believe that I wrote it. And I'm quite impressed with myself. And I look at it and think it's got 7 citations, which shows you just how niche it is. One of the papers that I really say, wow, you know, I'm amazed by this piece of work. Obviously, it's a niche field, but still 7 citations. What are you going to do? That you know, but that was my first experience with the AAS journals. It was my very first science paper, and it is one that I'm still very proud of, at least in terms of the content.
I wondered, given the content of the paper if it has little parts of your fingers or your scalp on it as well.
But I look at, the AA, there's three people, thought about it carefully. There's three papers that I think of the AAS in my experiences. That's one of them. The other one is what I alluded to, being part of the HST key project and the distance scale. I guess in some sense, the one paper that skews all of my citation stats is the final paper on the key project, 3,000 citations. But it was sort of the crowning achievement of sort of 5 years of my life working with that team. And I'm quite proud that, I sit number 3 on that list, just behind Wendy Friedman and Barry Medor, which sort of does reflect the, leadership, quote unquote, role that I played in it, which was good. Cool. And the last one I did want to say, and it's one that I'm also super, super proud of. It was published AAS journals, but it was Bulletin of the AAS. It wasn't one of the abstracts or anything. It was back at a time when the Bulletin of the AAS published, occasional real papers that were refereed. And it was a paper in 1999 that was looking at whether your career prospects were impacted upon by where you did your PhD, sort of prestigious versus non-prestigious. At the time where I was doing my PhD, I thought of it, it was a fairly small, modest department. And I got to thinking that, is this going to hurt my career because I've done a PhD, not at the Caltechs and Cambridges of the world. And I sort of built into my head that, this was 2 strikes against me sort of thing. And what I did was I looked over a 20-year window of graduates from about 20 different universities around the world, some that would fall into the classical prestigious category and some maybe in the less prestigious, if you like. But it involved me emailing and contacting and speaking with 1,000 people who had done their PhDs, many of which who had left the field, and tracking them down was a challenge. And so the amount of effort and time I put into that paper is, again, it probably exceeds any science paper that I've ever done. It had Virginia Trimble as the referee, so it was a tough refereeing process. But I'm incredibly proud of an incredible amount of work. I looked it up today, and it still sits with a glorious 0 citations.
Well, people, we are going to put a link to that paper down below in the video description. So
it did lead to an invitation I did actually get an invitation from the AAS Council at the time. It was around the meeting in Chicago around 2000, 2001, I can't remember, where I did get to go to council and actually talk them through the analysis and address sort of the findings, which was a cool thing. Again, no citations, but what can you do? So those are 3 papers I really wanted to highlight in terms of my experience with the AAS.
Wow, that is awesome. Oh boy. I also understand that. So let me ask then, why did you decide to become a scientific editor? And your case is somewhat unusual in that you decided to become a scientific editor twice.
Yeah, so that's good. I do get asked that question. So, honestly, I'll be honest, that up until about 2004, I hadn't really given probably a huge amount of thought to doing something like that. And by that, you could probably interpret that as being I hadn't given any thought to being an editor. And then I got contacted by Rob Kennicott, who was one of the PIs of the HSTK project, and at the time was editor-in-chief of AppJ. And he had sort of contacted me about, they had a hole in terms of the coverage, and asked me if I might be interested in applying. And that was the first time I'd really given any thought to it. And so his encouragement, his support, it sort of meant all the world to me. He was fantastic as a PI on the HST Key project. But to be honest, if I just seen the ad place or something, I probably just would have gone by it without really, I don't know, in hindsight, who knows? But at the time, I probably wouldn't have looked at it. But it was Rob's encouragement to pursue it that led me to that first appointment in 2004, which I did for 6 years. And I think at that point in time, at the end of 6 years, I'd had, I wouldn't say I was burnt out, but I'd sort of felt that it takes you a couple of years to sort of get up to speed and how things go. And then I felt at that point in time that it was good for me to take a break, maybe let someone else come in and do it. And I didn't, at that point in time, that would have been 2010. And it felt like the right time. I didn't want to get stale at the job, and took 6 years off. And then I got contacted by Ethan Wisniak, who I guess I'd overlapped with a little bit towards the end of my tenure at the first go around. Same thing had happened. You know, there was a hole in coverage amongst the scientific editors, and I could fill that hole. And I was ready to come back and do it again at that point in time, and that was what, 2016, I guess. So yeah, I felt like, you know, the 5 or 6 year cycle is good, but having 5 or 6 years off in between also feels right.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. So we actually did have a little overlap then, because I started in 2009.
Yes, yeah, that's right. So we would overlap just for that year. So
yeah, yeah. I also I did see one of those ads. So that was back in the day when they would put an ad in the AAS bulletin.
Yeah.
Yeah, or the job register, I should say. And I applied for it, and well, here I am.
There you
go. So in the current epoch, in your round 2, roughly how many submissions per week do you handle?
You know, spread throughout the year, it's pretty lumpy, so it depends on, you know, any given thing. But if I sort of amortize it over the year, probably works out to about four a week, maybe, new ones coming in. Yeah, I admit I've not gone back to sort of count them up, but it feels like it's around 4. Yeah, there'll be some weeks when there might be 2 or 3. There might be a week when there's 5 or 6. Yeah. Depends on, you know, most of mine come through Chris Consolish as my primary lead editor. So I do get sort of 3 to 4 from Chris, but because I overlap also into sort of star formation and some of the areas sort of away from that, I do get, you know, I get Steve and Judith, who do send me, you know, maybe 1 a week that comes through them as a lead editor. So it's somewhere in that 4.5 probably is what it works out to over the year. Okay. Yeah. So maybe 60, 70, 80, somewhere in there, steady state in some stage. Yeah, I could probably open up and take a look, but yeah, it is probably like, I just thinking off the top of my head, the ones that are in there, the ones that are being reviewed, ones that are being revised, it is probably something of that order. Yeah. Just let people know, sort of, yeah, get 4 or 5 a week and say, oh, that doesn't sound like much, but you know, it's a several month process. And so it's this relentless thing that never slows down. So yeah, if you disappear for a few weeks, it's like, oh my God. Oh no. So on those submissions that come in, what do you think makes for a good, solid initial submission of a manuscript? Well, I guess that's probably the $64,000 question. Probably me as an author still trying to figure that one out myself, to be perfectly honest. But I guess when I'm looking at papers now, what do I like to see? I like papers. This is just my own personal thing. I like papers that avoid hyperbole. Okay. I wouldn't say, you know, it automatically gets my backup, but you know, if I'm being bombarded with words like phrases like the first, pioneering, transformational, these are all sort of, you know, warning bells. And I would say the same thing about grant submissions as well when I'm reading those things. So there's very, very few that really fall into those sort of categories, and it doesn't make them work, you know, weak or unimportant or anything like that. But you know, it does sort of get a little bit, it wears on you a little bit, and it leads to maybe a second thing, that rush to claim to be first or pioneering often means that you sort of bypass or undersell sort of founding contributions that have been made in the field. And you know, I see with you know, my own students. You know, there's a tendency with nowadays, your citation or referencing horizon seems to only be 3, 4, 5 years, sort of. You know, everyone lives from week to week on this week in archive sort of thing, and you know, what's new. So I guess I like papers that can place their work into real context and do understand the real pioneering contributions that were made. And you know, in my field, for you know, galactic halo work, for example, you know, everyone cites Egan Lendenville and Sandage and Serlins in And that's great. They're fantastic papers. But if I ask people, have you read those papers?
Yes.
No, I haven't, because it's an automatic, lip service citation to those. So I think, the good advice that I had from my own supervisor in Vancouver, Paul Hickson, was he really drummed that into me, was read those pioneering papers, don't just cite them. So I like seeing that in papers that recognize how their work really fits into what's going on, not only today in the last couple of years, but really how it links up with work that has been done before, which it sounds like an obvious statement, but too much of it feels like lip service.
Yeah. There are certainly articles that just make it on a must cite list, but you don't. And that's
Yep.
One should avoid that. One should actually read those classics for a reason. It helps you, put your own work together. So.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Let's see. So you go through that and you get it out. And so do you have any tips for authors during the editorial process?
I guess, okay, well, beyond sort of, what I've just mentioned in terms of fair and sort of comprehensive referencing, if you like, one advice, and it's maybe not a BAAS advice that I try to pass on, because it was passed on to me from peers as well, is being, first is general advice, being generous with co-authorships. This is, it's good practice to be collegial, collaborative. If you pick up some great ideas from a chat at a conference for just, in a few minutes where you seeded some idea, go back to those people, offer them co-authorship. If you're that 8th, 9th, or 10th person on a paper, doesn't make any difference to anyone. And, but that sort of paying it forward with that sort of collaborative gesture can open up, new partnerships in the future. And I think that's just common sense. But, again, in this era of publish or perish, some people maybe are less open and generous with that sort of collaborating. They'll think, oh no, we'll acknowledge you at the end. And sometimes that's the right thing to do. But sometimes I do feel that, that unwillingness maybe to add that one extra co-author who seeded some idea or contributed some small part to that paper works against you. And so I like that. But anyways, one thing that I would say as an SE that's maybe more practical, and it might just be me personally, I like to see the authors use the suggested referees option.
Okay.
I was trying to think about it across my papers. You can put in suggested referees and deprecated referees. Mm-hmm. And I would guess maybe 5 to 10% at most put in suggested referees. Yeah, but I do appreciate it. And obviously, if you abuse it by only submitting your friends, eventually this is going to come back to bite you. But most of us in the community don't behave that way. And most do genuinely provide sort of unbiased, impartial suggestions. So I do appreciate that when people put in 4 or 5 suggested referees. And like I said, if I catch wind that someone's playing some games, okay, that's not going to help you in the long run. But if you do take the time, you know your field really well. And if there are 4 or 5 people that you would like them to actually read that paper and like to get their feedback on it, then it doesn't hurt to put it in. I may not always use it, right, but there are many times when I have found someone through the suggested referees who's been outstanding. Doesn't mean they're always going to accept it. Probably the acceptance rate, if you like, from them is no different. You might not think that's the case, but personally, and again, it may just be me personally, I actually do appreciate when people do make use of that little entry when they're submitting their paper.
Agreed. Definitely. And I'll just make a small comment, at least from my side. You're talking about being generous with co-authorship. I would say that also extends to putting your work in context with references.
Absolutely. In fact, that's a very good point.
I understand, particularly when, the era of I'm first, pioneering, etc. There are competing groups. You are standing on the shoulders of giants. And even citing those other, competing works is just good practice for putting your contribution in perspective.
Absolutely. And I could not agree more. And I do my best to try and not fall into that trap of doing it myself. And I'm sure that I'm not perfect at it. I don't ever go out of my way not to cite a particular group.
Right.
I think the competitor ever.
Right.
There are some papers that probably slip by me, and I've done it by accident, and I kick myself when it happens. But I could not agree more with that assessment. You do hear rumors, people have the citation cabals where they only cite each other and these sorts of things. I don't know how real that is. We all have our own anecdotal evidence of various things going on. But again, I could not agree any stronger with what you said.
Yeah. Let's go to the other side. Referees. What do you like to see in a referee report, and what sort of behavior, I guess, do you like to see out of referees?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of obvious ones, like, if you say you're going to do it, actually do it, and all those sorts of things. But those are sort of common sense ones, I suppose. Maybe it's just a reminder, and it's probably something when I first was doing my very first referee reports that I probably didn't appreciate. But it's kind of like reminding referees that their role is not to reject the paper. That is not what the first thing that should be popping into their mind. It's, to me, it's they should be going in at least with the mindset that there's some probably at least some sort of gem or nugget of an idea in there, and what can I do to tease that out and bring the paper to a level that meets that threshold that it should be published. It's not about attacking and tearing down. Can you be constructive and bring this paper up to a point where you're satisfied? You may not be 100% satisfied, but can you meet a middle ground where you are satisfied, at least, that you can go forward, rather than nitpicking to find some way to reject it? So I like to think myself, and when I'm a referee, what can I do to improve the paper to get it to that level, rather than what do I do to try to reject it? And I'm not saying everyone does that, but that's maybe just common sense advice. And probably the other one that, again, probably when I was younger doing my first reports that I didn't do properly, that I think I do now, is that, write your report in a tone of voice, that would convey the same thing that you would do if you were talking to that person face to face. I know the process is anonymous, but use a language and a tone that you would if you were sitting over a table at a conference discussing, I don't agree with that. Why'd you do it that way? What could you have done better? Not because 99% of us wouldn't be attacking the person. And again, these are not the way all reports are, but I think that think how would you like to be spoken to, and how would you speak to them verbally if you were speaking to them, and use that tone of voice. Doubly so if it's a student authored paper, you try to catch that and remind the referee that, look, this is a student authored paper. It might be the student's first paper. Right. So, I will do it for any paper, but, I'm doubly careful with student papers where I look at the tone of the report. And if there's anything in there, sometimes it slips through and I miss it. But if I see something in there in the tone that I'm not happy with, whether it's unnecessarily aggressive, just using certain pejorative terms that I don't like, I will edit those out. So your report is not sacrosanct. That's maybe another point to the referees that they don't realize, is that I will edit that report if I don't like something that's in there. I'm taking your advice, but if I don't like it, it's coming out. So don't even really bother putting that in there. Again, this is the exception, not the rule, but anything that's sort of aggressive, unprofessional, unkind, I'm going to take that out. So don't even bother putting it in right from the start.
Just to close the loop, so the very first referee report I ever wrote was when Virginia Trimble was the scientific editor for the journals, and that was my first one.
Good one.
Yeah, and you do get better with it over time.
Yeah.
I agree.
Definitely. I would be interested to go back, maybe when there's some not freedom of information, but when the statute of limitations on the UpJ referees report, 50 years,
75
going back and looking at my referees reports, and I won't be around to see them, but and I've got ones on disc, that I've done over the last sort of 15 years or so, but I know in my head that the ones that I did at the beginning fell into this trap of what's wrong with this paper? I got to find the little things and I'm going to pick it apart. And I know that I've evolved with time, even if I can't find the evidence of it. I know if I went and looked at those first few reports, I wouldn't be happy with the tone that I took when I wrote them.
I definitely have a couple of those myself that I'm not pleased with in retrospect. But it's a learning process, and
Learning process.
that's why there's a scientific editor to help mitigate those.
Right.
Cool. So is there anything else you'd like to share about the, let's say, the editorial process?
Yeah, I mean, it's maybe nothing specific other than to say I wouldn't have come back for a second go round in 2016 if I didn't enjoy the first time around. So the reason why I've come back to do it a second time is that I really enjoy the team who are involved in the process at every stage of the process. I mean, that everything from, the editor-in-chief, the lead editors that I interact with, the entire team of SEs, the annual meetings. I love, sharing best practice, supporting one another. I do actually feel like I am really part of the team rather than just, a cog in some machine that's churning stuff out. And I really do feel when I speak up or my input does seem to be valued and acted on and listened to, and that's not always the case with many committees that you might be part of. So that feeling is something that I really value, and I wouldn't have come back for a second go around without it. But I think, when I think of the AAS journals, the thing that really does stand out to me even more than anything that I've just said there is it's the support team, the production team that are around us all the time. I look at, my interactions are largely with Janice Sexton and her team, and they do so much behind the scenes. I can't even imagine all the stuff that they do behind the scenes, to the point that the job just would not be feasible without them. And I'm sure if I went back through, I've been doing it, 11 years now that I've in these two runs. Janice and her team have saved my butt on multiple occasions on stupid things that I've done or said. And I cannot say any more positive things about the role that they play within the AAS Journal production process. They are awesome. Absolutely pivotal. I cannot speak highly enough of them.
Yeah, I agree. Janice, Alex, and the current epoch, they're just fantastic.
Agreed.
What scientific editors do is modulate the peer review process, the science, but we really don't have much to do with the production side of the house, from manuscripts coming in through the revision process, shipping it off to production. All that is taken care of behind the scenes by the managing office.
And I know they're doing a whole lot behind the scenes because, they catch so many things. They come back with really pointed, good questions for me whenever there's amendments, corrections. I mean, they're, without them, and the job just wouldn't be possible. I know that they're doing just a ton of stuff behind the scenes because I see just a small fraction of it, and it's already an amazing amount. So I, again, think of the world of them, and I'm not sure I would have come back for a second go around if I didn't know there'd be that support team around us.
Awesome. I'm going to tell Janice to watch this video. The other one I would like to mention that also is value add and is probably news relative to your first run is we do have data editors, software editors who provide feedback that you can either share with referees or you can put directly in your cover letter to authors. And we do have a statistics editor, which is probably new. And so they also add value in a different way than the managing office does. But it's
no, that's an absolutely really good point. And I just today, I've been getting a lot of great advice from a couple of papers from the statistics editor just today alone, and they do an absolutely fantastic job. And it is really, like you said, it's value added that other journals don't have, and that is a huge selling point.
Yeah, particularly with the rise of data and
absolutely,
et cetera, and machine learning, which didn't exist 10 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely.
To have that input into the scientific process. Awesome. Brad, I want to thank you so much. You are a character.
I loved it. Anytime I get a chance to chat with you, Frank.
So thanks, man. I really appreciate it. And everyone, we will see you on the next one. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.